Good afternoon. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that we hope will help improve your life. I'm Stu Reid. Here's my co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave. And today we have a very special guest, Elinor Tatum, the publisher and editor-in-chief of the Amsterdam News. Elinor, welcome to Community and Technology.
Well, thank you so much, Stu and Dave, for having me with you. It is absolutely a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to talk to you. What a storied publication. The Amsterdam News, started in, I think, 1909, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm going to let you tell us a little bit about the history. Certainly one of the oldest black newspapers in the country, if not on the planet.
And certainly one of the most respected
Oh,
for
that
the
too,
last 60
without
years.
a
And I
doubt.
know that because it's all over the history books when you
Yeah.
read them.
Okay, Ellen, if you would tell us a little bit about the paper's history and how it got started.
Well, it was founded in 1909 by Charles Anderson in the San Juan Hills section of New York, and that area is in the 60s on the west side. And that whole area was actually raised to create what is now Lincoln Center. And
Mm.
so that was actually the black area of New York City. And so when they made the plans at the turn of the 2 centuries ago to build Lincoln Center, they tore down all the buildings there, and the black community moved up to Harlem, and that's how a lot of the Harlem migration happened.
Mhm.
And so the Amsterdam News at that point moved up to Harlem, and we went to our second headquarters, which was up um, on Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard. And then around 1938, we moved to our current offices um, on Frederick Douglass Boulevard. Yes, Dave.
Mhm.
Oh, that was for Stu to introduce me. I didn't think you'd pick it up and bring me in. The reason I wanted to come in, I invited Eleanor because I was following a link to a story in the Amsterdam News, and it looked really good. And it looked, when I looked at the masthead, like it's doing better than most of the publications in the world ever since the internet and now AI is. What have you been doing different than almost every newspaper I know?
Well, well, every newspaper in the world, I think, is having its issues right now. And I don't think there is one newspaper, including the Amsterdam News, that is not having its struggles, because we certainly are having our struggles as well. And the one thing that we are doing differently, and there are a lot of newspapers and other news gathering organizations that are doing the same things that we're doing, is that we are no longer looking at just philanthropy and advertising sales as our way of supporting our newsroom. And we have found that philanthropy is one of the ways that we are going to have to look to sustain ourselves going into the future. And so that means looking at innovative ways to partner with philanthropic bodies to help to support our endeavors when it comes to news gathering, whether it be health reporting or climate justice reporting or reporting on gun violence. So, over the last several years, we have come up with innovative projects and programs to um, help bolster our news gathering capabilities and to help support our roster of reporters. We've also come up with programming and creative parts of our newspapers. So, for instance, a few years ago, we started Blacklight, which is the first um, investigative unit of a legacy Black newspaper. And philanthropy is what has helped to create that unit. So we've been going after grants to help us to support that investigative unit and to also help us bring in other reporters, data reporters, health reporters, science reporters. We've also partnered with organizations such as Report for America, which comes in and helps us support reporters at different levels. So we've looked at various ways to help us offset some of the costs that make it very hard for some newspapers and news gathering organizations to actually have real staffs.
Well, have your costs decreased at all because of maybe a shift from paper to digital, from print to digital, or I guess you got
Oh,
all your staffing and reporting and all your administrative costs. That hasn't changed. So,
those have all gone up. And
okay,
Yeah.
we still print the paper.
okay.
Don't get
Hmm.
us wrong. We still have a print publication and we still feel very, very strongly about our print publication, but we are a union shop.
Hmm.
All of our departments are unionized.
Wow.
Um, we also have health care for all of our employees,
Hmm.
of which we pay 100%.
Wow. That's
Um,
impressive.
and so that causes, that's a huge burden. We also own our building in New York
Hmm.
City. Um, those costs are astronomical,
Hmm.
in terms of real estate taxes.
Hmm.
So we are still alive in spite of all of those things.
That's
Um,
Let me add to what we're just hearing. I can confirm the amount of the reporting. The Amsterdam always was short on reporting, and that was what told me they're doing pretty well. They had more original reporting than I remembered from them.
Mhm.
And let me add to what Elinor was too modest to say. Yes, they did this and they did that. And obviously, they had management who was very competent and doing a very good job. Who was the editor before you?
are you talking when before me?
Maybe I should have asked who was the publisher before you.
My father was the publisher before I was.
Yeah. Tell us
And
about your dad, Elmer. He was quite a guy, and I don't know if our younger folks that may be listening, maybe some of the older folks don't know him either, but he was somebody I'd like to lift up if you could just tell us a little bit about him.
Well, my father was born in North Carolina in the 1930s. He was one of 13 kids.
Wow.
His father owned three small newspapers down in North Carolina. He said that my father always described them as small farm newspapers, that printed whenever they had enough ads.
Mm. Mm.
And he said that he was the managing editor when he was 9 years old of
Wow.
those newspapers. He also said that my grandfather's dream was always to own a newspaper like the Amsterdam News.
Mm.
Um, we only have actually one copy of that newspaper, and it actually has a photograph of my father and his twin brother
Mm.
coming back from working the tobacco fields when they were about 9 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Um, so there's a long history of newspapers in our blood. But
Mm.
so my father, after he left North Carolina, he went into the Marine Corps and he served as the first black drill instructor in integrated Marine Corps and served in the Korean War.
Mm.
And then moved to Sweden for a year to write about being black in white America. And then came back to New York and was a community activist and got involved in New York City politics and became a, oh gosh, deputy borough president of Manhattan and a commissioner, and then became part of a group of investors that bought the Amsterdam News out of bankruptcy in 1971. At that time, he was working in New York City politics as well, and did not have a direct active role in the paper and did not become publisher of the paper itself until the 1980s.
Mm.
Um, and he was known for very strong stances against some of our mayors, such as Mayor Ed Koch,
Mhm.
um,
I'm
where
old
he
enough to
wrote,
remember that mayor, and he was right. Racism got worse in this city when he was mayor.
yes, and then also under Giuliani.
No. Mhm.
um, and so he was a very, very strong voice for our community, and wrote the editorials in the paper until his death in 2009.
Mhm.
Um, I came into the paper in 1994, where I worked alongside with him, basically until his death.
Mhm. I'm just looking at the story, the background on your website. It says you took over editor as publisher and editor-in-chief at the age of 26. Is that right, Eleanor?
Yes, but luckily I
Wow.
still had my father there,
Wow. What a
to
responsibility. What was that like?
work
Come
with.
on. What was that like taking that over at that age?
Well, as I said, my dad was still there.
Mm-hmm.
He was emeritus, but I still had his tutelage, and I still had, his hand was still in things, so to
Hmm.
speak.
Okay.
Um, so but it was still, very much a trial by fire.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
Um, you know, when I first started at the paper in 1994, within 6 months of me getting there, my father had a quadruple bypass.
Wow. Wow.
And so, when I started working at the paper, well, before I started working at the paper, my father basically told me it was now or never.
Hmm.
He told me if I didn't come there at that point in time, that he was probably going to sell.
Mm.
Um, and so I had to make a decision
Hmm.
on a bus.
Really? What was that like? Did you have you didn't have the same background as your dad, publishing at 9 years old. What did you have a real feel for it or a passion for it at that age?
Well, I'd worked on my college newspaper, and I had always known that this was something I probably wanted to do.
Hmm.
But he had also told me just a few years earlier that he wanted me to go out and do something else first. So I had been at graduate school for a year at Stockholm University in Stockholm, Sweden.
Hmm.
And then he came out and met me there, and he said, "Okay, it's time." And I thought I was going to have a few years of time,
Hmm.
but he said it was now or never.
Hmm.
So then I came back and started working with him full time immediately. And then while I was at the paper, I went back to graduate school and got my master's in journalism and communications.
Hmm. Wow. Wow. Dave, you
Let's
look like
go
you
back to
jump in.
something you said that was interesting. How long did your father make it after his heart operation?
Well, that was 1990, probably 1995. So he was around for um, another 15 or so years.
And the reason I asked that question is that people assume that a heart operation leaves you, well, not what you can be. I
Well,
had a
that,
triple
but
bypass. Yeah.
yeah, well, that had nothing to do with his death.
Huh.
No, but I wanted to make the point that people can do just fine. And I'm getting around. I go out to a movie or Lincoln Center 2 or 3 times every week.
And you had a
And I'm
triple
three
bypass,
years
right,
past
Dave?
a triple bypass.
Right. Okay.
Well,
And,
I mean, quite frankly, you can be much healthier after you have one of those surgeries.
Yeah. Gets fixed.
and there's also every reason to understand that when you want to recover from something like that, you have to do the exercises. I
Oh,
wound up
yes.
going into rehab for physical training, uh, and it made a big difference. And 30 minutes a day on a bicycle makes a big difference. And maybe I wouldn't have had a heart problem if I had always been that active.
Mm-hmm.
Your dad was pretty fit, Eleanor, as I remember him. I remember meeting him and interacting with him a bit, I guess, in the mid '80s. And he seemed like a pretty fit, active guy at that point in time.
My father was always active, yes.
Hmm.
But he did have his health challenges.
Hmm.
He was a diabetic,
Mm.
but that came on, at a young age. It came on in his 30s.
Oh, wow. Wow. Hmm.
And he was an insulin dependent diabetic.
Wow.
Um, and he had heart issues, but that also goes along with diabetes.
Hmm.
Um, and so he, but he weathered those well. But what really, what happened to him in the later 90s was um, we were actually down at South Street Seaport and we were sitting at a table and the chair he was sitting on broke and he hit the back of his neck on a table.
Mm.
And that's what really started his decline because that partially paralyzed him. And so he
Oh,
became an incomplete quadriplegic from that.
wow. Wow.
Let me
And
ask,
That's
he
go
had
ahead.
surgery, and after that surgery he was never able to walk again.
wow.
That's painful to hear.
Yeah.
But I brought up your dad because I wanted to ask you the question. Harlem's changed an awful lot since his day. I've been
Oh
watching
yes.
it. I live on 119th Street, and it's been amazing. What have you seen since you took over as editor of the paper or publisher of the paper?
Well, I mean, that's a loaded question. I mean, there's so many changes. I mean, the entire
Yeah.
city has changed. I mean, the entire world has changed over the last 30 years.
Mhm.
When I started at the Amsterdam News 30 years ago, most people didn't have an email address nor a computer in their home, none, and definitely not a computer in their hand.
Right. Hmm.
So, so there is no comparison
Hmm.
to what was then and what is now.
Hmm.
Um, but although so many things have changed, so much has stayed the same.
Yeah.
In so many ways, Harlem is still completely underserved.
Hmm.
I mean, we have a few more stores now. There's a Whole Foods, and there are a few big box stores, but and the population has shifted, and a lot of people have been priced out. Real estate is much, much, much more expensive. Um, I don't think we have the same feeling of community as you once had in a lot of parts of Harlem. Um, the mom and pop stores, a lot of them are gone because they can't afford the rents anymore.
Hmm.
Um, so a lot of the sense of community has been evaporated because of some sorts of gentrification. But that gentrification has not been, it's been gentrification in not all the good ways.
Hmm.
The people that should have benefited from it have not.
Right.
Um, and the bad parts of the community have lingered, and the good parts of the community have been taken away from the people were so dedicated to it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Stu, you're working on the edge of Harlem. Why don't you tell Eleanor what you're doing? And that'll lead up to the next question.
Okay. Well, we were talking before you came on, Dave. Before we got started, we were talking a little bit about uh, my work back in the '80s, which was in cable TV. Again, underserved communities. You may remember, Eleanor, so much of the city. Manhattan had cable back in the '80s, but the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens did not. And again, underserved. And so my partner and I,
And the East Village.
yeah. So, we worked and ended up doing a community cable TV operation based out of the project in the basement of a public housing project in the South Bronx, and began providing service to the not just underserved but the non-served folks in the South Bronx. Ended up on the front page of the New York Times as the electronic Robin Hood, providing service, not taking from the rich and giving to the poor, but giving to the poor that which only the rich had at the time. Anyway, fast forward, 30 years, technology has changed. We're now doing internet-based technology. And just as it was 30 years ago, we're underserved again, as I'm sure you well know. Underserved in terms of access to a high-speed data and applications. Of course, most folks do have the smartphone that you talked about, but that's not the same as having real high-speed access in your home. And what my partner and I, Doug Fraser, I mentioned his name earlier, we have a nonprofit that we are partnered with public housing residents themselves. We work in public housing since the early 80s, mid 80s. And what we are doing now in partnership with public housing residents is coming up with applications and services that help with their quality of life and their public safety. What we have learned is it's not enough just to give folks a connection, because then so many folks, what do I do with it? How does it serve me? What's the utility? So you got to come up with applications and services that really resonate with folks' needs. And the way to do that is to have them design it, have them tell you what they need, have them involved in putting those things together. So that's what we've been doing in Harlem and Brooklyn and the South Bronx as well. So, I'd like to share with you offline some of that stuff. But just to your point, Eleanor, is, our communities continue to be underserved. The technology may have changed, and maybe 30 years later, but the way that we continue to be ignored and shunned and just not catered to the way that mainstream and middle class and quite frankly, white folks are catered to. It's a travesty. And, just given the utility and how important broadband and internet technology and applications are, there's a digital divide. I mean, folks throw that term around, but it really impacts quality of life of folks in our community. So, we're working as hard as we can to help empower folks and putting the tools in their hands so that they can empower themselves. That's what we believe in. Yeah, if you put the tools in the hands of the people, they'll figure out how to use them, what to do with it. So
You
that's been
got to
our.
give them the key example that everybody could understand. The lobbies.
Mhm.
Talk about it.
Well, going back over 20 years, Eleanor, we were working in the South Bronx, and one of the resident leaders who's not with us anymore, but he was a very visionary, courageous guy. John Johnson's his name. He said, "I'm having problems with the seniors being accosted in my lobby," and we had just put a camera in his office so he could monitor his office remotely. He said, "Can you put a camera in the lobby?" We said, "Sure." Put a camera in the lobby and enable folks to look at it on their smartphones. They weren't nearly as advanced as they are today. This is 20 years ago. But folks had them, and their tablets were starting to come out. And this resident leader said, rather than having folks sit in the lobby and mostly seniors, mostly women, looking for issues, they call it the tenant patrol. He said, why don't we have a virtual tenant patrol? So he came up with that. We helped him actually implement his vision, and it became a big success with the residents. So now, in a lot of the properties where we work with residents themselves are able to monitor on their smartphones, on their devices, what's going on in their lobby, in front of their building, in their public spaces. This is not for management, not for the police, but for the people themselves. So that's just one of the applications that people came up with and that the people are implementing and controlling. So, a big part of what we do is something we call our resident teaching network, where we're teaching folks how to put in these technology devices and applications and how to use them. And I don't want to spend time talking about the stuff that I'm doing, because we were here with Elinor Tatum, the editor and publisher of the Amsterdam News, and I don't want to get sidetracked with our stuff. But I just wanted to underscore the point that she is making, and that is that even though so much has changed, so much has not changed. And in particular, services in our communities for our folks we continue to be underserved.
Elinor, does that feel like what you're seeing when you're working up there? Still a big digital divide?
Oh, I mean, yeah, definitely. I think what we're still seeing, the broadband access is still an issue for a lot of people. Um, I know just with our own offices, we have had issues with getting good connectivity. You know, just for instance, after really bad storms, we will sometimes have our internet out for weeks at a time.
Mhm.
Um, it's the infrastructure is still not great. If you're in an older building, the wiring is still not great. So I mean, yes, we've got, cell phone service and we've got, the Wi-Fi, but if you're still basing it on old wiring that you're using your Wi-Fi off of it, it's still not necessarily that reliable. In addition to that, if you look at a lot of folks, they still may not have a computer. They only have their phones as their way of connecting. For a young person doing their homework off of their phone it's not that ideal.
Mhm.
And so there is that divide. Now, young people, I mean, they're digital natives. But being a digital native on your phone is very different than being a digital native on a computer and
Yeah.
actually using a computer.
Mhm.
And having access to actual computers where you can actually sit and write a paper is something very different
Yeah.
than writing a paper on a phone.
Mhm. Yeah, one of the things that we've discovered and we try and push is to change folks from being mere digital consumers to being digital creators. And you got to move beyond just the social media applications to there's so much that can be done using broadband. Just want to quickly mention the previous Mayoralty administration in New York City under De Blasio created something called the Internet Master Plan about 2 years before he left office. And the city council set aside $157 million to allocate to small, minority-owned, women-owned, community-based groups that would help bridge the digital divide in New York City with a particular focus on public housing. Our group went through a whole arduous RFP process, vetted for over a year, almost 2 years. We were actually awarded or designated to be awarded a major piece of that funding to bring services and training. Again, I kind of want to emphasize that you can't just throw the access at folks and expect that that's going to really change their lives. You got to really train folks and give them ways to utilize the technology to improve their lives. So it's much more than just having access. So anyway, long story short, that money did not get out the door before the Adams administration came in. He froze the whole program. Actually, he killed the program. He and his chief technology officer, Matt Frazier, and instead redirected that money to the major operators and gave that economic opportunity to Altice and Spectrum, the big cable operators, which we thought was a real travesty and just a misappropriation of public funding and the public will. Anyway, long story short, Councilmember Jennifer Gutierrez, something that you might want to take a look at, Miss Tatum, in terms of your publishing hat. She just introduced a bill in the city council to resurrect the internet master plan. So, offline, I'll send you some background info on that just to kind of let you know what's our take on that. But Dave, I know you wanted to step in, but we are at the halfway point.
And I've got something that we're going to ask Elinor as soon as she comes back.
Okay. So, Eleanor, can you stick with us for another 10, 15 minutes?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, thank you. This community of technology on WHCR 90.3 FM, Stu Reid, Dave Burstein, special guest Eleanor Tatum, publisher and editor-in-chief of the Amsterdam News. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after a brief musical break.
Winter night It's that magic time of year when love is all around us, and that magic seems to reach right out and touch me again, just like the years before. It's Christmas in my heart. It seems the time stands still for Christmas. It's time for laughter and cheer. Time for giving to others. It's sharing our love for those we hold so dear. Too soon the season's over, as I face the new year. This wish I make on every star, may it be Christmas, always Christmas in my heart. It seemed that time stands still for Christmas. It's time for laughter and cheer. A time for giving to others. It's sharing our love with those we hold so dear. Too soon the season's over, and as I face the new year, this wish I make on every star, may it be Christmas, always Christmas in my heart. Oh, it's just Christmas in my heart. Have a good time.
Okay, we're back. Community and Technology today, Burstein and Stu Reid with our special guest, Elinor Tatum, publisher and editor-in-chief of the Amsterdam News. Dave, before the break, you said you had something you wanted to bring to Miss Tatum. Go.
Yep. Stu, I met you 25 years ago or so when I went up to the South Bronx to see what you were doing. And you were putting in video over VDSL. And I happened to be a reporter covering all the DSL stuff. I wound up writing a book. And you were ahead of just about every neighborhood in the United States, including the rich ones, including Verizon. And you were just doing it. People don't know you because you're good at really building things, but you've never been good at telling your story. So we have an experienced newspaper person here, not particularly for Stu to do, but what should a community group that's doing something interesting do to get coverage, even though it's hard to get the New York Times north of 96th Street?
Well, I mean, they have to have a compelling story. They've got to put a human face to it, and they've got to find the right reporter in whatever organization they're looking at. You're not necessarily going to go to a crime reporter and try to talk about a technology story. But you might if there is a connection to it, like this technology program is going to reduce crime. So you've got to find the right hook. You've got to find the right hook, and you've got to find the right person, and you've got to find them on the right day.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so true. So true. So, Eleanor, we were talking about the genesis of your paper, and I just looked at some of the stuff that in the background. When your paper was started over 100 years ago, there were 50 black newspapers, according to your website. How many black newspapers are there today? Do you have can you fill us in on that?
Well, the National Newspaper Publishers Association, which is the trade organization of black newspapers, says there are about 200.
Mhm.
Um, Whether all of those are publishing currently, I do not know, and whether they're publishing regularly, I do not know.
Mhm.
However, over the last several years, I'd say the last 10 years or so, a good 25% of all newspapers, black or otherwise, have shut down.
Mhm. You say 25%?
25% of newspapers
Wow.
have closed.
Wow, that's a big
And
number.
Um,
from the point of view of somebody who went to journalism school, it's really looking bad. I sent over to these folks a chart which had 70% of the working reporters in the United States have lost their job in the last 10 years. Eleanor, would you recommend somebody goes to journalism school today?
it depends what they're going to journalism school for, because there are many different reasons to go to journalism school. It may not be because they want to be writing for a newspaper. It could be because they want to be writing books. It could be because they want to be doing some sort of communications. Um, but if somebody wants to pursue journalism or communications or anything, if they want to become a better writer, if they want to be communicating, I mean, journalism school is so much more than just writing for newspapers or for a website. It's learning ways to communicate with the rest of the world. And so, yes, you can learn that in many, many different ways. I mean, for each person, it's their own thing. Um, it's not like if you're a doctor, you have to go, a doctor has to go to medical school, right? Um, do you have to go to journalism school? No. Uh,
Absolutely not.
However, there are things that you can learn in journalism school that can be very helpful, and there are people that you can meet in journalism school that can be very helpful. And there are things that you can gain and that you can learn from journalism school that can be very helpful. That being said, is it necessary? Probably not. But if you're the kind of person that can get a lot of out of it, and it's something you want to pursue, then by all means, something that you should go for.
I'm definitely not suggesting to people there's no reason to go to journalism school. My partner, Jenny, went to Columbia Journalism School. And when we got together, I picked up all her old textbooks. I was a working reporter and literally have subscribers around the world. But I learned a lot from the things they were teaching in journalism school. But when we were talking, I just said, you absolutely don't need to have a journalism degree to become a working journalist. And let me give you a quick example. I've spent the last 2 years doing artificial intelligence. We all know it's a big thing. We all know it's exploding. We all know there's a lot of money there. There are now about 15 daily or weekly publications that I read as many of as I can because they're pretty good. 3 of the best, I was thinking as you were talking, are people who had no journalism experience whatsoever. They were technical people. Two of them were just a couple years out of college. They knew the subject matter. They really loved and cared it. They work hard. They're doing pretty well. And I can tell you, they are among the best reporters covering artificial intelligence, unlike most of the people at the Wall Street Journal or the Times. But let me ask that to Elinor. How much have you been able to take somebody who didn't go to journalism school, but knows the community, and have them work with you?
I'm not quite sure what the question is. I mean, not all of our reporters have gone to journalism school.
And that's what I'm asking. What have you been able to do for the people who didn't go to journalism school, but knew the community or knew their subject?
Well, I mean, anyone that knows how to write, I mean, that's key. They have to know how to write. The mechanics of journalism can be taught or can be learned, but they have to know how to write, and they've got to know their subject matter.
And,
Those are the key. Those are the key parts.
and how many people who had no journalism background have managed to succeed as a reporter at the Amsterdam
Oh, I
or
have
other
no idea.
publications you're with?
I have absolutely no idea.
How big is your writing staff, Ellen? I'm just curious.
Right now, our editorial staff is approximately 10 people.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That includes editors.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it takes a whole lot to put out a newspaper.
Yeah, it does.
What's the non-editorial staff there?
You're making me count through our departments now. Um, about 6 or 7.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it is hard. I spent a few years doing the computer work for a printer that incidentally printed the Amsterdam. And that's why I had met Elinor 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And there is so much going on. And beside the design and the layout and the running the paper and keeping the books and the payroll, you need a lot of people to sell advertising usually.
Well, Eleanor's talked about a shift in the revenue model, and I find that interesting, and maybe she can tell us a little bit more. You talked about going after the philanthropic money, and is that something happening across the board, Eleanor, or
There are many newspapers that are looking at philanthropy as part of their model. If you look at most websites, when you go to them, they will be asking for donations from their readers.
Mm-hmm.
And
including, I just saw today, the Associated Press and Reuters.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, most news organizations ask for donations.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those are tax deductible donations, some of them are not, but they're all asking for donations to help with their news gathering
Mm-hmm.
so that they continue to do the work that is bringing news to the people.
Mm-hmm. Ellen, what would you? No, go ahead, Dad. No,
Oh, I'm sorry. You don't have to edit this out because we're doing this live the day before the show, and seeing what actually happens not merely is interesting for some people, but people actually like the fact that the people they're listening to are real people and talk about real problems. In fact, let me throw that over to our guest. What does the Amsterdam cover that people wouldn't think of? I mean, obviously you cover everything in politics. Obviously you cover big events in the churches, but you do a lot more than that.
Well, I mean, we cover everything from street namings to an organization getting a small grant of 25,000 or 1,500, or scholarships, or students, getting the athlete of the week, or a school making a milestone, or a school closing down, or a school opening up, or health disparities, or what is happening to migrant children in our schools, or what is happening in terms of gun violence in our communities and how it's affecting our communities. We're doing a lot with climate justice right now and what is happening with the heat island effect and violence in our city, why our city is flooding. Um, so we're doing all kinds of stories that you would not necessarily expect to be happening in a Black newspaper. We're doing deep investigative stories. We're doing whole series on bail reform and on reparations. Um, I mean, it runs the gamut on the things that we do. We have coverage from um, the Afro-Caribbean community, the African community, from Africa, from South America, um, from the entire diaspora. We try to be very inclusive of what our community actually is.
I remember when I was working at the printer, we got the Amsterdam every week because we printed it. And I was amazed at how they found a way to cover nearly everything that happened in the community. What not necessarily big things. The Times the Times does come north of 96th Street sometimes these days, but doesn't so often. But local newspapers, what's the value of a local newspaper to the community? Because they're dying around the country.
Well, we've got the pulse of the community. We are talking to our neighbors and to the people um, that represent our communities, so that we have an ear to the ground as to what's actually going on, and we are able to tell the stories that are affecting our community and our neighbors, and that's really, really important. And we have the ears of the stakeholders, so we can talk to them about what is important to our readers as well. And we've, in a sense, been the heartbeat of our community for over 115 years. And that's one of the reasons why newspapers like the Amsterdam News and the Amsterdam News are so important, and that our continuation is so important. And, just like, the AP and Reuters have that little box that comes up and asks for donations, so do we. You know, Philanthropy from our community is so important. People giving us a few dollars a week, or getting, um, the subscription that's not the regular $49, but it's the $149 subscription, because it puts a little bit of money into the other things that we are trying to do and continue to provide the journalism that we're trying to provide, means a lot and goes really far, because without that support, we cannot do that. We will not be able to continue doing this work.
Okay,
Stu,
David,
how much time
Eleanor,
do we have?
we're down to our last minute or so. I wanted to throw it to Eleanor and ask her what she'd like to leave our audience with. Maybe something that you think is one of your most important stories, or one of the most important things that we should be looking at. But what would you like to leave our audience with, Eleanor?
What I want to leave the audience with is the fact that if you believe that the stories that we tell are important and necessary, that we need your support, just like every other news organization that's worthwhile. Because without your support, we will not be here come a few years from now, because it is a dire situation for most news media out there. And while we may be doing better than some, it's not all that much better.
Mhm.
And we need the support. It's coming down to a point where the whole news landscape is in jeopardy. And a free press is one of the pillars of democracy. And our democracy is in jeopardy. And without a free press, it will be in even more jeopardy. And so I implore everyone that is listening to really look at the media that they consume and to support it, whether it be the Amsterdam News, and I hope it is the Amsterdam News, whether it's WHCR, which of course I know they support because they're listening to it right now. But being able to support it is so incredibly important. And without the support, I'm down the line, we too won't be here.
How can folks reach you to extend that support, Eleanor? Your website?
They can go to our website. Yeah, there's a donate button right on there, www.amsterdamnews.com.
Okay. Well, you heard it here. This has been Elinor Tatum, publisher, editor-in-chief of the Amsterdam News, the renowned Amsterdam News. Elinor, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Dave and Stu. It's been a wonderful time with you. I really
Okay.
appreciate you both. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Okay. This has been Community and Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid on WHCR 90.3 FM and on the web at WHCR.org every Wednesday, 5 to 6 p.m. Tune in. Just might learn something. Thanks. Good night.